Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Celebrate 26 years of doing this crazy stuff and Monday Night Football with the Ravens and sitting around all day on Sunday and doing it. We're going to be sitting around all day on Friday in Owings Mills at Mama's on the Half Shell. Can't wait to get up and see the new space there. I am a big proponent of all things Nacho Mamas in Canton, as most folks know, and in Towson. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We'll have the Raven scratch-offs, the lucky batch to give away on Friday. Also got some great guests coming out on Friday. I'll be announcing a little later on in the week. Luke Jones will be a part of a short week in Owings Mills this week as they prepare for the Cleveland Browns, and certainly not DeShaun Watson. I'll have some Cleveland guests around here. We'll have some residue from Monday Night Football in Tampa. Luke Jones joins us now on behalf of our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, as well as Royal Farms, even though he's wearing his Pizza John's hat. Luke, I got my feelings hurt on Saturday night into Sunday. I had to soothe myself by going to Pizza John's at approximately 12:32 p.m. on Sunday. We rolled out wings, rolled out cheesesteaks, rolled out the works pizza the way I like it. No meat sauce, half onion, half green pepper. I avoided the pineapple, did that last week. Crab cake, did that last week. And we brought it all home. And I had to soothe myself after all these people beat me up. How dare I suggest that the Maryland Terps fan base not storm the field when they beat a 3-3 team by a point in an unlikely comeback? I mean, where do you stand on that? And most importantly, before we get to NFL talk.
I don't have any problem with it. You're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds who have had so little to nothing to get excited about as it pertains to Maryland football. And look, I'm very jaded when it comes to Maryland football. I didn't watch the game.
Well,
I
you live in
rarely watch the
Pennsylvania,
game.
so you're like Wise Markets. There's a lot of Penn State going on up there. It really is. Once you just hit Hereford, go to
But
Mount
but
Carmel Road, boom, it's Penn State Landia.
it is. But that said, I mean, they erased a 14-point fourth quarter deficit. It is a signature program when you're a program that is trying to find your footing in, we're in the Big Ten before this recent expansion, and it's so odd to think about USC in the Big Ten. I mean, that's another discussion for another day, but it is a signature program, and it is something to feel good about. Look, am I going to sit here and say that was that truly a win that warrants storming the field? How many wins really warrant storming the field? And look, we could talk about
That's why it doesn't
the
happen.
safety issue of it and all that. But that said,
I'm not on the
again, you're just
safety thing. I'm not even on the not
okay. That's fine.
18-year-olds having fun. I'm on the
I'm
is it a
just
big enough game to storm the field? And if it's any other
but
program,
you're
we're
picking on
laughing at
18 to
it.
22-year-olds. But you're just picking on 18 to 22-year-olds. If it were 50-year-old men, Maryland middle-aged Terps fans that were the ones storming the field, then
But
all right,
that
I'd
would
hear you
be
a little bit.
okay if you're Mike Collins or me storming the field because you beat Florida State and you're going to the Orange Bowl. Like, I
Middle-aged
remember
people
that
shouldn't be
23
storming the
years
field.
ago. Oh, you
But
don't want to storm the field anyway?
not at my age.
I've
No,
never stormed the field. I kind of want to, but I
that's
don't
for
want to when
college
you beat
kids.
USC when they're 3-3 and think you beat OJ Simpson in his prime. That's all. Or Matt Leinart in his
I
prime, or
guess. I
pick
mean, it's
anybody you
just.
want.
I mean,
Sanchez.
it's just kind of a shoulder shrug to me. I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Well, it began quite a weekend of football. So, I mean, if
Yeah.
nothing else, we awakened early on Sunday to awful football from London, and then worked our way through DeShaun Watson, worked our way through the Lions and the Vikings and Bears, oh my, and the 49ers and Chiefs. It brought interesting comments from Tom Brady, and then I spent the entire evening chasing baseball and the Dodgers and my friend Janet Marie Smith and wanting to beat the Yankees, if nothing else, after what Soto did the other night. But it was a great weekend of football. Ravens game Monday night aside, whenever that Chargers ESPN Plus thing is, none of us are going to be watching. I've been watching a lot of sports, a lot of baseball, a lot of football, and the NFL for me. It was a great day to be on the couch. It was a beautiful day too, but it was a great day of football Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, you always get an opportunity to assess the rest of the league, and I'll go back to something you said last week, where you you basically said all but 8 teams in the league stink. And look, there's a lot of haves and have nots. I mean, there really is. And one thing that struck me was, we did get a few really good games. Like for example, Detroit, Minnesota was a really good game. Two really good teams in the NFC, division rivals, all of that. But you also had, I mean, even going back to the Thursday night game where the Broncos just completely destroyed the Saints. You had quite a few games that ended up being pretty lopsided. I mean, you mentioned I saw 5 minutes of the Jags Patriots game. I went to church and then went to brunch. I mean, I wasn't wasting my time waking up watching the Jaguars play the Patriots. Maybe a decade ago, but not now. Um, but that game ended up being the Patriots are 1-6 and the Jaguars. Okay, they won a game. Good for them, but they stink. Um, I thought Seattle beating Atlanta was, good for Mike McDonald. I mean, the Seahawks, they started out so good, what, 3-0, and then they had lost three in a row, and their defense had gone sideways. So, but you kind of just go down through the list of games this weekend, and as I mentioned, you had that NFC North clash. Packers and Texans was a really good football game. I think that was a game that good for the Ravens. With the Texans falling to 5-2 as you're trying to look ahead to potential AFC seeding for the playoffs. So always good to see some of the other perceived elites in the AFC go down as the Texans did, but also a lot of just bad football too. I mean, Dolphins Colts. Ugh. I mean,
Well,
just
I mean,
not.
there's a perception of quarterback play, which is where I could take this while we're watching Lamar run around and even Baker Mayfield's resurrection on Monday Night Football, right? But for me, Russell Wilson, talk of the league, right? Aaron Rodgers got his coach fired last week, and everybody on NBC has to run around on eggshells about what they say and what they don't say and who they're critical of because of who owns the team. And the Jets are a disgrace. The Steelers are what they are, which is, if you're going to make a case for Mike Tomlin to go to the Hall of Fame or John Harbaugh, I'll bring Tony Romo in on that. Tomlin manages to do it without the top-notch talent that Jeff Beauchamp once talked about here at WNST. And I see what Jared Goff has done with his career. You mentioned Seattle and Geno Smith and these guys that have had resurrections. Sam Darnold, despite the outcome this weekend, and DeShaun Watson, who might be the end. And as much as we talk about cap numbers, we'll have the whole week to talk about the Browns, and we're going to play them this week with whoever their quarterback is. And I saw Jameis Winston's thing, and my dear friend Daryl Ryder from Cleveland was videoing that in the locker room, does the same work you do out in Cleveland. And the quarterback thing for me can't be illuminated more in week 8 when you say have and have nots. Very few teams have a quarterback and have not anything else.
Yeah, but I mean, this is all we hear about is parity in the NFL, and I think this is actually an appropriate time to bring this up because you had the Yankees and the Dodgers in the World Series and payroll and that conversation, which I'm sure you and I will have at some point here this week. But in the NFL, as much as we talk about parity and it's a parity-driven league, and you have the salary cap, we see the same teams there in January over and over and over. Why? Because they have quarterbacks. They have franchise quarterbacks. You don't see teams. Okay, you might see a team get in as the number 7 seed when they don't have an established answer at quarterback. And certainly the Browns last year with what Joe Flacco was able to do for them was kind of the exception to the rule at this point in time. And I don't say that it's a compliment to Joe. And it's a disparaging remark to the Cleveland Browns. But these teams that have quarterbacks, they're at a distinct advantage compared to the teams who don't. I mean, it's that's kind of the Captain Obvious statement, but it doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, even look at Kansas City right now. Patrick Mahomes is not playing his best football. I mean, he's thrown more interceptions than touchdowns. But I will say what he is doing for them, and obviously their defense has played at a very high level. He manages the game. He has the awareness right now to look at what they have and what they don't have in terms of their receivers, in terms of Isaiah Pacheco, and he manages, right? I mean, Patrick Mahomes right now is a game manager, and I'm not saying that to be a knock on him. It's kind of where they are right now. He's kind of looking at that, and I get it. You'd say, well, he threw a couple interceptions, but if you also look at those plays, they're kind of both freakish plays. But I mean, that's the difference when you have a quarterback who has won 3 Super Bowls and quite frankly isn't really all that interested in the regular season at this point in time. I've made this comment about Lamar. I mean, Lamar's putting up great numbers, but we've seen Lamar on multiple occasions after games this year be ticked off. And he's ticked off because of something that happened late in the game or, frankly, the defense not playing well in Dallas, for example. You could tell he was ticked off about that, even though he didn't say it. He wasn't throwing anyone under the bus, but he was unhappy about it. But you have these quarterbacks who have, in Mahomes' case, has either been to the top of the mountain or in Lamar's case is trying his hardest to get to the top of the mountain. That you kind of go through this regular season and you just say, okay, that's great, and you got to win games and you need to get there, but the destination is all about January. But then you look around at so many of these teams who don't have that, and you just see a lot of listless, mediocre football, right? And I mean, look at the Raiders Rams game, and I get it. They have Matthew Stafford, but the Rams have been ravaged by injuries, right? They're 2-4 even with that win. And okay, they're going to get Cooper Kupp back, and they're going to get Puka Nacua back in the coming weeks, and we'll see if they can turn things around. But you look at that game and you just look at those two teams, and you're like, where are they going, right? I mean, at least the Rams won a Super Bowl a couple years ago, but in the case of the Raiders, it's like, where are you going? I mean, even Aiden O'Connell gets hurt, but it's like he's not your answer. That's not your franchise quarterback of the future. So you have him or Gardner Minshew, and you just look at that and you say, like, what is this? I think the Browns, and we'll get into this, and I don't want to belabor the point. The Browns to me are at such a it's horrendous, but it's interesting from the standpoint of, do you just lean all the way into tanking and start Dorian Thompson Robinson, who I don't think that kid can play. I mean, I don't. I know they've liked him in the preseason the last couple of years, but he was awful when he came in on Sunday. Or Jameis Winston, who might be able to win you a couple games here and there, and probably only mess up your draft pick if we're being honest, right? I mean, because they still have some semblance of a decent defense, if they would get anything at all positive from their quarterback play. But again, what are they playing for at this point? What's going to happen with DeShaun Watson? I mean, are they going to, I guess they'll be able to pick up some insurance, money in terms of, cap and all of that with him getting hurt. But I mean, it's just, you look at some of these teams that don't have that, Giants, another example. I mean,
well,
they even
the
paid
Cleveland
Daniel
Browns
Jones,
can't bring
but
DeShaun Watson back next March and say he's our quarterback because we're
I
paying him
mean, you
$60
wouldn't
million
think
dollars a
so.
year.
You wouldn't think so, but
Well, I mean, they are
look,
what they are,
you
right?
heard
So
that.
they're, I mean, it's like the Jets have
No,
their
but
quarterback getting their coach
no,
fired. I mean, these organizations that are mismanaged. I watched the baseball team here for
well, that's
30
my
years.
point. Right. I mean, you're right. In a vacuum, I wholeheartedly agree with you. In a vacuum, he would have been benched probably in week 3. I mean, that's how bad he's been. He's been awful, absolutely awful. And not even getting into fans cheering or booing him getting hurt. I mean, that 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 organization, that owner, put that fan base in such an awful position. And putting aside AFC North, Baltimore, Cleveland, putting all that aside for a moment, you bring in someone that is such a lowly human being in terms of perception and in terms of off the field transgressions and all those cases and all of that. And on top of that, he's played at a horrendous level. And then you have players, and look, players are emotional after games. They aren't going to necessarily have the same kind of perspective that a fan base or outsiders are going to have. So, their comments, but it just speaks to just an absolutely toxic relationship right now between that franchise and that owner and its fans, right? That they were even put in a position that, one, they had to root for Deshaun Watson, and two, he didn't even play good football. I mean, usually the saving grace when you have an off the field issue with a player is that they're going to play at a high level on the field. And there's that conflict in terms of, okay, don't like what he's done off the field. Don't necessarily think much of him from a character standpoint, but at least he's a heck of a football player. And we've seen that play out time and time again in so many markets and so many different sports. But you have someone who you don't think anything of off the field in terms of their character and their who they are as a person, and they stink, right? So, yeah, when he gets hurt, and I don't want to wish injury on anyone or anything like that, but how are the fans supposed to react there, right? Because you put your fan base in this impossible position because your hubris as an owner made the move that you did and gave that guy of all people a fully guaranteed contract. I mean, it's toxic. I mean, it's absolutely toxic. Yeah, it's absolutely shameful. And we started talking about this a couple years ago when Watson wasn't looking like the Watson from Houston. We said it at the time. The Browns are going to get everything they deserve with this. And, that's playing out now, and he's hurt now. And, whichever quarterback they're going to play, I mean, it doesn't matter. They're out of it. They're not going to make the playoffs, or certainly even if you like Jameis Winston, even if you thought Jameis Winston should have been their quarterback, back in week 3, they're not climbing out of this hole at this point in time. So what do you do? Do you just lean into it all the way and just tank and try to go about it that way? Or do you try to put your best foot forward with Winston and maybe you win a handful of games here the rest of the way? And well, that might prevent you from getting the top quarterback in the draft then. So, I mean, it's just, but it goes back to any of these teams that don't truly have a guy, the guy as your quarterback. And, whatever that line of demarcation is, whether you think there are 6 truly elite quarterbacks or 8 quarterbacks that can win a Super Bowl, 10 quarterbacks that can lead you to a Super Bowl, whatever you think the number is, there's clearly a line of demarcation. And the problem is what we've seen, and Watson's the extreme example, but how about Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville right now, where they paid him, but does anyone there feel conviction that he's going to lead them to the promised land someday? Doesn't feel that way. I mean, Tua in Miami's a little bit of a different situation with the concussions and there being a health and injury element. But some of these teams that have paid quarterbacks where you just look at it and say, should you have? Just because you can, just because some people are saying you should, doesn't always mean you should. But then on the flip side, you are the Ravens, a team that has an MVP at quarterback. And okay, the one thing you could say is they've got to do it in January. Yeah, noted. Everyone not named the Chiefs has to do that at this point in time. Josh Allen has to do that. Joe Burrow still has to do that because they didn't win when they went 3 years ago. But these teams that have a high-priced quarterback who isn't getting the job done, I mean, boy, you talk about a scary place to be. At least in the case of Pittsburgh, whether you want to talk about Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, they're not married to either one of those guys, right? I mean, they're not signed up long term paying those guys lucrative money. So at least you have that much, even if I'm going to sit here and say, no, Russell Wilson's not leading the Steelers to a Super Bowl. Justin Fields isn't leading them to the Super Bowl. But at least they're not in a position like some of these other teams who have paid a quarterback, and yet you still have questions. I mean, look how much the Giants are paying Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones, to just have games where they bench him in the fourth quarter because they stink. So, I mean, it's not where you want to be, but that's where a lot of teams find themselves in the current landscape of the National Football League.
Luke Jones and I are monitoring football and baseball all week. There is a World Series, even though it's the Yankees and Dodgers. I'm sure you won't hear much about it in the media this week at all. We're getting ready for the Cleveland Browns as well in the aftermath of the Ravens and the Bucks on Monday night. Something I noticed, just league trends, and I just sort of wrote this down. Because I can go all night with the fans in Cleveland and guaranteed money and wherever the floor was in that Cleveland deal for all these quarterbacks. Kickers. And having one, and we've kind of always had one here, except in the Billy Cundiff case where, and again, I still go back to one of the reasons to not put Harbaugh in the Hall of Fame was that game, that decision, running him out. Cundiff's still a GOAT 15 years later here. But it's been Matt Stover and it's been Justin Tucker. In the way that we watch the Steelers, it's been 3 head coaches they've ever had there, and the Jets have had 150 and 150 other quarterbacks. Ken O'Brien, the whole deal, right? Kickers in the league and teams that don't have them and are trying guys out in week 7, and this guy's different than the guy a week before. This is the time of the year for that a little bit too. And there's nothing that's worse than having Lamar, having Derrick, having all of that, and setting up for a 38-yard field goal to win something and not hitting it.
Yeah, I mean it's and we talk about this a lot in college football too. I mean, some of these programs, elite programs, even programs that are giving out the NIL money and all that. That's changed that landscape. Where you joke and say, "Man, they have everything except like, how can they not find like some walk-on former soccer player that could just do the job for them as a kicker?" But to bring it back to what you're saying, I mean, it's the ultimate missing piece. If you have and look, if you're a bad team having a great kicker, I mean, okay, I mean, fine. It might win you an extra game along the ways, but if you're a great team and have the makings of a Super Bowl team, but you don't have that figured out, or heaven forbid something happens to your kicker, yeah, that's something that can be devastating to you. The narrative early in the season, of course, we were talking about Tucker. With his some of his issues beyond 50 yards early in the year, even going back to last year, was that kickers are better than ever. From long distance, they probably are, even though some of those numbers have regressed to the mean a little bit here since the first couple weeks. But there's still something to be said for just consistency and just someone that you can depend on. And in the case of the Ravens, okay, has Justin Tucker the last couple years been peak optimal Justin Tucker of the prime of his career? Maybe not, but I still trust him a heck of a lot more than just about every kicker in football if you're lining up for a game-winning kick. And that's valuable because as much as, yeah, you want to be in the space that the Ravens have been in occasionally in the Lamar era, where there have been times where they haven't had to use Justin Tucker a whole lot, right? Other than kick extra points because their offense has been that good at times over the last 5, 6 years. But if you're in that spot, sure, you want to have that. And if you are in a position where you're trying to figure that out, I mean, it's an on the margins kind of move, but it's an important margin, if that makes sense.
Who
So
was the kid
yeah,
we
I mean, you
had that
look at
missed
some
the
of these
kicking
teams
in
and
Minnesota Halloween weekend? Because we had Graham Gano for 5 minutes.
Steve
Graham
Hauschka.
Gano, Steve Hauschka, both of those guys had great, I mean, Gano, just great careers, not here. And I don't think about them. I think it feels like they went from Stover to 2 minutes of Cundiff to nothing but Justin Tucker because it's been nothing but Justin Tucker for a long time. And I noticed kickers around the league a lot on Sunday and the movement of it more than I don't think you and I have talked about kickers outside of our kicker in a long time, but it's a big issue in a lot of places. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't noticed it that much. One, I don't spend a lot of time paying attention to kickers. I mean, I just don't. But when it does show up, yeah, it can be a big deal. And you mentioned a couple of those guys. I mean, throw Will Lutz in there. A guy who was with the Ravens in the preseason several years back at this point in time, and has had a really fruitful career as an NFL kicker. But it's one of those things you don't think about it, and maybe what I just said kind of reflects this. You don't really think about it, and you take it for granted until it slaps you in the face that you don't have it, and then it can really threaten to derail your season. I mean, it absolutely can.
It's
And
just an
Billy
automatic
Cundiff
in the
was
fan base here.
an
The fan base
unfortunate
here is just sort of
example
like
of that.
you get to the 50-yard line, bring Tucker
Sure.
on, he can make it, no problem. What's the win in Tampa or Cleveland, wherever we're going to be? Is it a good day for our kicker? I've never lost that confidence. Even 3, 4 weeks ago, people beating Justin Tucker up. I see what other fan bases are doing to sort of cross their fingers and hope. Luke Jones is our dude. He is Baltimore Luke. He is on the football beat all week long, as well as the baseball beat. Anything else around the league for you? You sort of took a slap at the Steelers. We didn't really talk about the Bengals because they struggled enough. Um, and in the framework of the AFC, to think that the Jets were going to be anything, I never believed that. I had Ian O'Connor on, who wrote a book on Aaron Rodgers right before the beginning of the season. I'm not an interested in Aaron Rodgers guy. Boy, the Aaron Rodgers show, PU to all of it. Yeah, I said that to my wife too. I'm like, for whatever we have here with the Ravens and whatever the stability brings and whatever our drama of the week might be around here, it's not that around here lately.
Yeah, let's face it, even with all the Lamar contract drama, it's not like they didn't win, right? It's not like they were having, they didn't have a 5-12 season in the midst of that or anything like that. I think a lot of it, and look, putting aside any, him going on Pat McAfee or any of that kind of stuff, he's 40. Go look at the history of the NFL with quarterbacks that are that age, other than Tom Brady. They fall off a cliff. And I would probably say that Aaron Rodgers is probably still better than a lot of Hall of Fame caliber quarterbacks who got to that point in their career. But, it's drama, coaching decisions, personnel decisions. They have a pass rusher who they traded for who hasn't played a snap for them yet because of a contract holdout. It hasn't just been Aaron Rodgers. That's been a blank show in a lot of ways, but certainly he's been in the middle of a lot of that, even going back to last year. But, I just, looking at that and look, when I took a swipe at the Steelers, I don't think it was a big swipe. Is it really that out of turn to say that I'm not a believer in Russell Wilson at this point in his career? God bless him. He had a good second half on Sunday night. We'll see what, that decision I think is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. He put up some good numbers in the second half. I'll give him credit for that. He throws a jump ball, and George Pickens is a wide receiver that can take advantage of that. I need to see Russell Wilson do that consistently because for the last couple of years, he hasn't looked anything like the guy he was back in Seattle. But my biggest takeaway from the weekend or from Sunday of NFL action, and I touched on this briefly, but the Chiefs have just mastered figuring out whatever the minimum is that they need to do to win a ball game in the regular season. They clearly have to figure out their offense. There's no doubt about it. Think about how the guys they've lost. They lost Hollywood Brown. They've lost Rashee Rice. Isaiah Pacheco's out. Juju Smith-Schuster had been the latest guy to emerge for them 2 weeks ago. He gets hurt on the first drive, with a hamstring. He didn't even play after that. Yet, they piece it together. Kareem Hunt's done a nice job for them of stepping up with Pacheco hurt. And, forget about Kelsey. Noah Gray, their younger tight end, has really started to emerge and has done a nice job. And more than anything, though, their defense. Steve Spagnuolo, give him credit. For all these coordinators we talk around the league, I'm not shocked because of his age, but it is surprising because of what he's done with that defense in recent years that there hasn't been a little more talk about him getting another shot as a head coach. And that's not to say that I know that he would be really great at it or anything like that, but there hasn't really even been much chatter about him in that space, considering what he's done with their defense the last couple of years. So, but that's the thing. The Chiefs, they're 6-0, and does it feel like the Chiefs are playing anything close to their best football? No. Not even close, but they're 6-0, right? How many teams can you say, well, they don't look all that good right now, and they're 6-0? So,
well, your monitors
that's
had
the
to beat
challenge
them
for the
on
Ravens,
January
for
28th,
the
right?
Texans,
Literally.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Now, I'll say this, and you and I haven't talked about this at all, and be remiss to not mention this now. They need to go get a wide receiver. I think that they absolutely need to go get a wide receiver. And that's where I'll compliment Buffalo, for all the attention that Adams going to the Jets received. I think Buffalo made the better move in terms of what they need for what it costs in bringing in Amari Cooper. For anyone who wants to bury Amari Cooper, and look, he was off to a bad start in Cleveland. Go look at the numbers Amari Cooper put up with Joe Flacco as his quarterback last December. We talked about it then. Amari Cooper catching passes from Flacco kind of, if you squinted it reminded you a little bit of Anquan Bolden on some of those sideline balls those 50-50 catches. I think Amari Cooper makes that Buffalo offense that much more viable, especially once he caught a touchdown Sunday, but once he gets a little more acclimated, a little more comfortable there, Josh Allen and him build a little more rapport. But all these other AFC teams chasing, figuring out how to be their best come January. We're still looking at the Chiefs right now, who are 6-0, and they haven't even looked all that great. They've had injuries, and yet they figure it out and they play just good enough every week. And they're going to lose a game at some point, obviously. I don't think they're going 17-0, certainly with the state of their offense right now, with how beat up they are. But that's what's frustrating for Baltimore, Buffalo, Houston, Cincinnati if they get up off the mat. Go down the list of throw the Chargers in there if you'd like to. All those teams, it's still okay. What about Kansas City? Because that defense is looking really good, and that offense is going to figure it out at some point in time, to be better inside the red zone. So that's kind of what's always weighing in the back of your mind. And you just said it. I mean, whether we're talking about the aftermath of the Tampa game, or talking about Cleveland this week, or we'll be talking about Denver or Cincinnati in a couple weeks, it's always Kansas City. I mean, it's always Kansas City that you're thinking about in the back of your mind. So to see them go into San Francisco, and look, the 49ers don't look very good right now. I mean, they're in trouble. There's the juxtaposition of the Chiefs overcoming their injuries and the 49ers not being able to overcome their injuries. And look, it's tough. Next man up, as I always say to you, next man up. You can say that so many times, and after a while, it's a T-shirt slogan because you just don't have enough when you go through enough injuries. So, that's still my takeaway. I mean, the Chiefs, unimpressive as it might have been at times, they find a way, and no matter how great the Ravens or any other team that's vying for that spot in either conference right now looks, they're still looking at the Chiefs and saying it's uncanny that it feels like they can just go through the motions and just do just enough to get the job done. And as they're gearing up for what I would expect is going to be another deep January run for them, and everyone trying to knock them off.
Yeah, then I look at their schedule and say, well, they got the Raiders. I mean, whoever you put them in with, they have Tampa 2 weeks from now, Monday Night Football as well. He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him somewhere out on the Beltway between I-83 and Owings Mills. It's a short week this week as we get ready for, I guess, Jameis Winston. I'm not sure. Dorian Thompson, maybe whatever. Either way, better not lose this one this week. And monitoring all things World Series as well. Luke and I are going to get that going. We began this thing talking about whether Terps fans should storm the field after beating USC, and that's not South Carolina, by the way, who it'd be a different USC at that point. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Getting Maryland Crab Cake Tour back at the Mamas on the half shell on Friday. Hope to see you out there. We're Baltimore positive.